Okay, that is us. Bread and Circuses from Chief Crow and the Flat Earth Worms. We are live July 19th, 2023, 9:30 p.m. Mountain Time. A little late tonight, but I just got the audio encoder set up, so if you're listening at paranormal.radio, Radio King, TuneIn, radio.net, and any of the other audio-only streams that carry Infinite Plane Radio, you're welcome to join our chats. Just go to infiniteplane.live and hit one of those links. So let me go ahead and send out a live stream notification. IPS Live Now. Call 505-510-4226 if you have any complaints or concerns. So again, if you're subscribed to the Patreon, if you're a supporter there, or if you're subscribed on the blog, you'll be getting a notification momentarily. Not sure about text alerts. I might send them. We'll see what the attendance is like. And if there's not a lot of people here and we're not getting any calls, I'll send out a text alert, make sure everyone's awake. Okay, phone number is also going to be in the headline of the email. Call now. A number of things to talk about. I actually have a list of like 9 bullet points, which I think what I'll probably do this evening is I'll feed those 9 bullet points into a command prompt for ChatGPT, and I'll say, please generate me a press release for Infinite Plane Media with the following topics, and it will do precisely that. It's one of the things I have in mind for long term is our use of press releases, and among the various uses is, of course, for ChatGPT, is just basically doing everything a copywriter would do, an editor. It's like a personal assistant if you train it right. Okay, let me go ahead and check in the chats. Okay, Rocco Calzone, McDirtywork, AJ306. Okay, look, let me go ahead and, 206. Wrong AJ. Let me go ahead and just monitor the numbers here for a moment. We'll decide if we want to send out a signal. Here are the topics briefly. Marjorie Taylor Greene and MAGA porn. Jason Aldean and his lynching song at number 1 on iTunes. Alex Stein, threatened by George Floyd's twin, Stephen Jackson. Richard Dawkins in The God Delusion has several pages of pedo apologism. Like he's actually an apologist for child abuse, which I'll show you. It's in his book, The God Delusion. It's pretty shocking. I wasn't expecting that. Rocco received a YouTube bell. Okay, cool. It's working. Another minor thing, but I saw this on Twitter. When Trump was being arraigned on 4/4, actually it's relevant because he's going to jail this week. When he was arraigned on 4/4, that was Heath Ledger's 44th birthday. Significant because Heath Ledger's the Joker, and Joker 2 was being filmed in front of that very courthouse with a mob of like 700 actors. So you have this 4/4, 44, Joker, Joker 2, and the number 44 is code, in my view. I believe it has to do with the resurrection, second coming, among other things. Joined by Howdy, Clockwork 113. Speaking of 113, I've been talking about how that number and other numbers are correlated with these various psyops. And the 11-3, 311 stuff we've talked about forever, but the new thing has been 611. And how that number is positively correlated with this predicted domestic violent extremist nuclear attack on America. Basically the white nationalist 9/11 to come. And interestingly, again, 6/11 is the date of the 33-year-old Timothy McVeigh dying. 6/11, Tim McVeigh. In that movie that just came out, Sound of Freedom, he has this pendant that's Timothy 6/11, which is kind of interesting. And then the Oppenheimer movie about the nuke, which is all predictive programming, is an IMAX film that's 11 miles long, weighs 600 pounds, 11.6. And then it was pointed out today, I believe by Lean Dion in our Gilded, that in the movie they're wearing these badges that have a K6, which is, of course, 116116. It's very consistent. Like, we're actually predicting predictive programming. We're actually we're calling out in advance the kind of code that we're going to see implanted into these movies, or whatever's shown to the public. It's not always just movies where this programming is used. Okay, I have a couple of voicemails. Let me go ahead and jump right into those first.
Hey, Infinite Plane, it's Richie from Boston. I don't want to hear you talking about me or anything conspiratorial when you're on my channel, Jailbreak Overlander. Richie from Boston, I'm out.
Okay, I think you all got that. Richie from Boston must have heard what I was saying. I mean, the guy would sit in his Jeep, griping about chemtrails while vaping. I'm like, you're hotboxing your Jeep. Is that what you call it? It's hotboxing when you like smoke, something in your vehicle and you don't roll down the windows. What is it called when you don't roll down your windows and you're vaping? And how was that not worse than chemtrails? I thought he had chemtrail lung from driving across the country, checking out chemtrails and keeping us all appraised of the dangers. But no, it's the vape. He's got the vape lung. Damn Jack is here, says who's calling in tonight. Jennifer Reeves is here. Polly Coffin, thank you for joining. Skyfish from DLive along with McDirtyWork. DLive is still pretty good as far as their app. I mean, I do like them. I just hate the fact that they're owned by the Chicoms. Skyfish says, Fake X supposed to launch soon. How big of an arch do you think they'll go for? Well, funnily enough, you mentioned SpaceX. It turns out that the Drudge Report right now, on its cover, says sex in space. And it has this like kind of a comic book image of a couple floating in front of the cupola. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Sex in space. Because I've been talking about for a long time how not only is space fake, but it's actually the replacement religion. And it has its esoteric side. And when you really get down to the core of it, we're looking at Mystery Babylon dressed up with science fiction. That is precisely what it is. So I'm looking at this Drudge Report cover space sex or sex in space, and I'm like, well, it's SpaceX or SpaceX. It's always been this intentional double meaning because it is an esoteric cult. It's, like I said, Mystery Babylon dressed up like science fiction, but now it's in your face. And, it's all allegory anyway. The trip to heaven, the obelisk rocket thing, and it's all very occult. It's actually quite obscene from a certain perspective. The religion of Crowley runs the world. It's actually quite literally true. They're not Satanists. It's not the Jews. It's not the Druids. It's actually this very eclectic, syncretic religion that draws from all sorts of sources. But ultimately, it falls underneath this very singular symbol, this black monolith, like your iPhone, the cube, the black cube of Saturn, which I think is some sort of symbol of a time-space prison for souls. Interestingly, I saw this video on Twitter, and I know it's fake, but the idea was nice. The video was depicting Mount Meru, this mythical mountain at the center of the world, at the North Pole, this magnetic mountain. And I was thinking about how Mercator actually wrote about this to John Dee. And John Dee is a very significant character in history. He coined the term British Empire. And they talked about this supposed 33-mile diameter black rock, magnetic rock in the middle of the world. Fascinating, just considering how black rock, the name, how significant that has become in recent years, who runs the world, and the 33, and how significant that is. I mean, I pointed this out when we had the Black Monday market crash in 2020 on 316. Black Monday, Black Moon Day, like the moonfall, we correlated these things, but it was 33 years from the previous one. And then we picked up on all kinds of connections here, like the Burning Man Festival, and Burning Man, a symbol of Christ, correlated with the Phoenix, and the Burning Man Festival taking place in Black Rock City, Nevada. For 33 years they had these before they were interrupted. I don't want to get too far down in a tangent, but I'm looking at the North Pole again with great interest. And the person in the video had kind of suggested that it's, I mean, think about the immensity of it if it were real. I mean, I'm not suggesting I believe it necessarily, but it's just curious that Mercator wrote about such a thing. Like, how would you just, so, I don't know, flippantly mix something completely fantastical with your real world mapping when you're going on these voyages of exploration? It wouldn't make sense. All right, Clockwork 113 says vape life. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, thank you for reminding me. We have voicemails to get through. That was Richie from Boston. I like his cousin Regina from Austin quite a bit more. Have you heard of Regina from Austin? She sells black market jet fuel, and they use it to melt 5G towers, like burn them, and they fall into their own footprints. Yeah, jet fuel. You put some jet fuel. I'm not saying to do this, but that's what she does. She sells this stuff. That's Regina from Austin. Haven't seen her in a while. Okay, next we have...
Yes, I've got a message for Klaus that calls in. Okay, this is for you, Klaus. Lesson 1. I would like to buy a hamburger. I would like to buy a hamburger.
Okay, I don't know what kind of lesson that was. I don't vet my messages. So if you want to call in and leave a message in the middle of the night, it's 505-510-4226. I do not vet them. I just play them live. Okay, next.
Hey, Tim, it's Echo Charlie. Okay, that's like the third time I've heard your story about the guy with the fake teeth. And I hope you can further discuss the similarities between that and the QAnon shaman.
Ooh, interesting.
Thank you.
Interesting. I mean, have we ruled out the possibility? Let me give you context. She's referring to Roland Reddy, the rocket scientist who was actually a persona worn by this Flat Earth conference organizer. It was like this dual identity. And there was a period of time where it really seemed like the QAnon shaman was none other than Owen Schroyer at InfoWars, tip of the spear. Only wearing some false teeth, false tattoos, and makeup. And when you put them side by side, they're twins. So until I see the two of them in the same room at the same time, it's the same person. QAnon Schroyer, Owen Shaman. Somebody prove me wrong, please. I mean, I look at him now, though, and I can see how maybe I'm wrong, possibly. Celestial Wonder says, how long have you been on? We just turned on, well, it's been live nonstop for 26 hours. So now that I know that this computer can handle the workload of maintaining the 24/7 stream and replays, I'm going to have to send out text alerts and obviously the newsletter alerts so you know it's live, because you don't get a live notification if I don't cut off the stream. And I like to keep the streams going, because when they have a 72-hour, a 168-hour video, I'm talking about YouTube, they can't parse it, they can't censor it. It's too big to censor. So we create these gargantuan files and just dump it on their servers and just continue to roll on, because if we upload discrete segments, hours, minutes, they will censor me. That's just how they roll. I mean, we know how these platforms work. If you want a wrench, it'll be handed out to you shortly. In fact, I'll be periodically going through the chat, handing out wrenches. And I'm going to be improving the site here. Pretty much everything. We're building up the office. In fact, let me go look around really quick here and see what recent upgrades. Okay, that's right. We have our inventory, our books to be listed. We are back on the audio streams as well. I just turned on the audio encoders. So you can listen to Infinite Plane radio at radio.net, at paranormal.radio, where strangely, we were in the top 13 for paranormal last year. And I mean, are we paranormal? Like, Mandela Effect is new age. Celestial Wonder says huge solar eruption today. Now, do not underestimate the significance of that. Because think about this. Back in January, at the 55th latitude of the sun, a chunk of the sun fell off. Now, the sun is a symbol of the crown. The halo, the sun, Christ, crown, these are all synonymous. And when that fell off, when that chunk fell off, I thought this is some kind of symbolic headshot. Like Kennedy, the crown, King of Camelot. And that was at the exact time that Tyree Nichols his protests were building. He was the guy who was killed by the police in a very Rodney King kind of way. So you already had the name King compared to Rodney King. Then Martin Luther King's daughters showed up at those protests. And the eulogy delivered by Sharpton, Reverend Sharpton, was at the chapel, the Mason Temple, where Martin Luther King gave his final speech before his death. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because we're talking about Martin Luther King being brought into the picture, because on Martin Luther King's 55th, again, the number 55 and the crown and the king, on his 55th death anniversary, 4/4, Donald Trump goes in to be arraigned. And this was the arraignment where it was during Holy Week. They compared him to Jesus, weirdly. But my point is, 55th anniversary of an assassination, 55th latitude of the sun. When Tyree Nichols' protests went out, they shut down I-55. So I keep seeing these 55s connected with this, and it was all foreshadowing something about, I think, some kind of a shot to a crown, assassination symbolism. And it's all been there. But I'm just saying, it was preceded by this very conspicuous story about a chunk of the sun falling. Ollie Goering says, I wonder what the going rate the censors pay the IPS trolls. Yeah, I was thinking about that. Like, could we get paid to shitpost truther bait on Twitter? And by truther bait, I mean stuff that's fake that you could debunk in 5 seconds. Then speaking of that, I mean, the worst stuff on Twitter right now is the MAGA created, the QAnon community created, simulated child abuse stuff that they're attributing to Hunter Biden. They're writing stories. They're adding details. It's sickening. And I feel like there's not enough people calling them out. AJ206 says, Dr. Shiva for president, Tim Osman for vice president, 2024. Well, look, I have to listen to someone for a few hours before I can form some definitive opinions. And I took some time to listen to a video by Dr. Shiva, and he had this very compelling explanation for what I call the cult of the monolith, the cult of the obelisk, the group that he uses the phrase the swarm. I definitely am going to be reaching out to him this week. And as far as being vice president, well, no, I'm definitely interested in following the campaign, having one of our reporters cover every single event, and kind of making that our inroad into having front row seats to the spectacle, to the circus in the coming months and in the coming couple of years. And yeah, I would definitely support Dr. Shiva over anybody else. Certainly not RFK. RFK is just so dishonest. Or he's dumb. Take your pick. And I prefer not to underestimate someone's intelligence. I just assume he's dishonest. Same with Tucker. Sorry if you love Tucker. I mean, I think he's hilarious. I like Tucker's work. And I think he's very skilled. But when he says that that movie is not a QAnon movie, that's just simply disingenuous. Jim Caviezel is Jim Q-Viesel. He's basically pushing Q more than anybody. Tim Ballard pushes Wayfair. And that whole story is unraveling. There's a lot about the production of the movie, who's behind it, its real intentions. It's almost like it's just a psyop. It's almost like Tim Ballard is part of some psyop to lend credence to the Q movement, and guess who's there right now? Interestingly, Donald Trump is watching Sound of, what is it again? A Sound of Freedom right now. Rated Q. I just got this message on Gilded. Keanu Reeves unites with band Dogstar for the first time in 20 years, and they announce a new album. Now that's interesting. Neo, The Matrix, a lot of, as you would all know, predictive programming, symbolism with this character. In fact, the last one, that Bill and Ted's movie, I thought it was awful, but it had the 113 in it. They had to have a song with 113 beats a minute to wake up the world. The 11-3 thing is pretty interesting here, but he's in this band called Dogstar, and we are in the dog days of summer, from July 3rd to August 11th. And he's one of these individuals like Jim Carrey, who are embodying these roles that have immense esoteric significance, and they carry on these roles that kind of merge with their real life personas. And so it's interesting to follow them. And as far as his affiliation with the dog star symbolism and all that, I know that there was a period of time where they said that when he was on tour, he always insisted on being put in room number 23 in the hotels. And the number 23 is associated with the dog star throughout the works of Robert Anton Wilson. And his book, The Cosmic Trigger, which posits that the dog star is the source of some kind of transmissions that will initiate some kind of higher states of consciousness in man. He asserts that the dog star is the source of this, the God star. And this explains his obsession in the throughout the book with the number 23, the symbol of the dog. It's just like, in a way, it's like, okay, I'm reading this stuff, and then I see it in the Truman Show movie where the dog star falls and wakes him up, and I'm like, what is this? Why are they putting these secrets in plain sight? Why do they have these actors? Are they misleaders? And some suspect there's some kind of attempt to wake people up, or it's some kind of sly wink or nod to the people paying attention. But maybe I'm pessimistic, but I tend not to think so. I think any guru placed out there that's kind of accessible is probably some kind of a limited hangout. And why would they not have a limited hangout operative for anything having to do with the esoteric, just as they do with the political conspiracies? I mean, they're not just gatekeeping the political realities and controlling our perceptions of what is going on with our governments. They're gatekeeping our reality, knowledge of the soul. And I don't know specifically about Sirius other than what I've studied here. And it's of tremendous importance to the cults that run the world. That much can be said. Everybody praises it and counts down on New Year's, where at midnight it reaches its highest point, then it falls. So it's part of all of our lives. Celestial Wonders has so many shills, so little time. Okay, AJ206 says, Shiva hates the Kennedys. He also got one of the Twitter lawyers to admit that there is, in fact, a back door to the government. See, I can prove this. I mean, I think we kind of can. I was like thinking, okay, there's something wrong with my phone because I can get into spaces, but I can't unmute my mic. So I fix my settings, nothing works. I log out of that account. I go into one of my SOC accounts, and I'm able to access all of the features. So I pay for the blue check, nothing changes. In other words, Infinite Plane Radio has been target banned from participating in spaces, and that's a big deal. In fact, it's a huge contradiction of Elon Musk's entire supposed stated position on free speech and Twitter's importance in the world as some kind of a commons. It's a commons except for the IPS. No, we have to stay out there. Now, Ollie Goering says, I want video testimonials of the rescued children if they're really rescuing children. Well, it turns out that the accounts that we saw in the movie, the way they look, it was embellished. It was very embellished. I don't think it was anything close to reality. And I'm not trying to say there's nothing heroic about the very idea, but what I'm saying here is that they likely created this as a psychological operation to bolster Q and bolster Trump, and it had to do with open borders, build the wall. It's a little outdated. This thing was meant to come out years ago. And if you really get down to it, and I know this is not going to go mainstream and nobody in the alt media is going to talk about this, but Tim Ballard doesn't exist. He's basically Paul Walker, who didn't even die, and they recast him. And if you look at the roles Tim Ballard played, and compare that to Paul Walker. Okay, so Paul Walker goes undercover in Fast and Furious to infiltrate a ring, a traffic ring, not child trafficking, no, underground racing, an underground racing ring. And he infiltrates it to get to the top and bring it down. Now, in Tim Ballard's role, he infiltrates another ring, a child trafficking ring, and he gets his way to the top to take it down. And the significance here is that when it comes to predictive programming, you're burrowing neural pathways into people's minds so they accept what you show them in the fake news later. So the audiences of the world who watch that very popular movie have already experienced that particular persona, and subconsciously they're probably recognizing it. I think this is how it must work. Consciously they may not, but he's already established himself as an undercover agent who, some kind of hero, possibly even a sacrificial type of martyr character, which is also a big part of how they marketed this movie. I mean, this movie's being marketed with reverse psychology. Like, they don't want you to see it. BlackRock doesn't want you to see it. George Soros doesn't want you to see it. They're shutting off the air conditioning. They're putting nanobots in the beverages of Christian conservatives. I mean, I'm hearing all kinds of stories, and it's just reverse psychology. It's very simple, and it's working. And now that Trump has gone to go see it, it's... Anyway, I've been on Twitter getting flack because I put a poll out there, and I said, is this movie a QAnon movie? Or is it... or not, because Tucker Carlson says it's not. 70% agreed with me that it's a QAnon movie. 30% did not. But the ones who didn't, who were commenting, were posting examples of what they thought was child abuse. Like, look, Hunter did this, Hunter did that. I'm like, you guys realize what you're posting, right? And what they were posting were just exaggerations. Fan fiction. They're manufacturing outrage. And a lot of these accounts look fake. So these are fake accounts manufacturing outrage, some kind of a... And it has nothing to do with the reality here. I mean, yeah, let's get rid of child trafficking. Let's investigate every single avenue here and not turn a blind eye because you think you found the scapegoat. But what the QAnon movement is doing, I think it's hijacking emotion and channeling it, kind of like the Dems do. So I was thinking about this today, the comparison. On the left, you have March for Our Lives. Save the children from what? The Second Amendment, guns. And the March for Our Lives is just specifically a Democrat thing. The Republicans don't care about the children's lives. Oh, wait, now they do. So they care about the children who are being trafficked, and these guys care about the kids, the ones who are being shot. But they don't care about the ones who are being trafficked. And the ones who don't care about the ones being shot are very concerned about the ones being trafficked. A lot of concern and not a lot of prevention. Let's see. Oh, okay. Now we're talking about fake shootings. Jason Aldean has a song called Not in My Town. And it's being construed as some kind of a threat to BLM. And it's at number 1. I believe I have some of the lyrics. I was looking at the lyrics, and the song is some sort of a provocation. I mean, people are trying to downplay it, but now the significance of him is simply that he was the singer at the Las Vegas Harvest Festival. Was it Route 91? And then Jason Aldean, JA91, all kinds of numerology, symbolism. The whole thing was fake, if you didn't know. In fact, the rounds that were being fired, that people heard, the people on the ground were saying, oh no, it's coming through the speakers. They knew it was fake. But listen to this. This is the song that's created some controversy for Mr. Las Vegas. And the reason why I think this is a calculated controversy is just because he played such a key role in a high-level psyop. And that psyop was target marketed at the right wing, because they don't care about the kids getting shot. So let's shoot up a country music concert. Hey, look, guys, your Second Amendment coming back to haunt you. Your love affair with guns, your country music values that believe in things like guns and flags and all that stuff. Look, it's getting you killed. Now listen to this, though. Try that in a small town. Jason Aldean. Sucker punch somebody on a sidewalk. Carjack an old lady at a red light. Pull the gun on the owner of a liquor store. You think it's cool. Cuss out a cop and spit in his face. Stomp on the flag and light it up. Try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Now it goes on, but it's try that in a small town. So that's been looked at as like kind of a provocation because, BLM can burn down Democrat cities and it's a peaceful protest. But if they tried it in a small town where people still have, gun rights, yeah, it could have been pretty ugly, I imagine. And he drew attention to it. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. BLM's kind of defunct, although... Now, this is also interesting, too, considering the timing, now that I think about it. You all remember George Floyd's twin, Stephen Jackson. You know, the 42-year-old Stephen Jackson, last man on earth to interview Kobe Bryant, All That Smokes, his podcast. Well, he caught wind. He heard about a skit. Now, I haven't seen this skit. It's Alex Stein did a skit where, according to Stephen Jackson, it involves, I believe, Donatarius, Alex Stein's wife's boyfriend, wearing a mask of George Floyd, laying on the floor, while Alex throws rings onto his, playing that game where you try to throw a ring on a stick. So he's throwing rings at this guy, and the guy's got a George Floyd mask. I don't know I haven't watched it. I just know that it offended a lot of people, and they told Stephen Jackson. Well, Stephen Jackson has been more or less threatening Alex Stein in his DMs on Instagram. He says, "Glad you think this is a laughing matter. See you soon." Yeah, Stephen Jackson threatens Alex Stein. Let me go ahead and, this is from my Substack. So here's the main premise, though, is because he's mocked him for some time about this. There's this joke, this ongoing running joke. I want to say shout out and congratulations to George Floyd. You've been sober for 3 years now. So he frequently jokes about this. Now, is this funny, or is it morbid gallows humor? Well, technically, it's not a funny joke if Floyd actually died, whether it's of a drug overdose or asphyxiation. It's not funny if he really died, is it? Now, what's more, Alex Stein believes Floyd died, but he believes he died of an overdose. So he's mocking somebody that he actually thinks died of an overdose of fentanyl. So that kind of got under the skin of Stephen Jackson, Floyd's twin, and he said, "I seen the video of you disrespecting George Floyd. I honestly pray I see you one day. It's a small world. Can't wait. See you soon. Glad you think it's a laughing matter." And then I think what followed that was Stein going into his live stream, begging for a sit down and talk. And Stephen was like, "You don't burn a bridge and then ask for a yacht to cross you back over." So I'm just suggesting this is interesting. And the fact is, Alex Stein believes it's real. He's making these jokes. And what he's doing, he's advancing the guardrail, the line that says that this event was real, but the line that divides it. I mean, this is what they always do. If you're on the left, he was killed by the cops. If you're on the right, he was killed by fentanyl. And open borders, because you can blame that on Biden. But both of them think he died. One says he's a criminal, one says he's a martyr. Well, these two perspectives are both destructive and designed to be so. That's why I don't really think that I have any sympathy for him. In other words, if he's going to push propaganda that's used to advance a racial psyop by mocking the martyr of the BLM, then he kind of deserves the flack he gets. Because if he was really in for the truth here, he would say, George Floyd's alive and he's having a Corona with Derek Chauvin because they worked together for years and they're both actors and the whole thing was a psyop, and you can explain it in a number of ways. There are so many tells, so many giveaways. The whole thing was fake. I realize the masses aren't ready for this, but that doesn't mean that you should by default push the mainstream view, which again is just intrinsically destructive. But we'll see where it goes, because the thing is, the tone of it seems to, like, this seems off the script. Like, I don't necessarily think this is part of a plan, the way that this is going down. And it could be potentially very, I don't know, bad for Stein. I mean, I would hope that it stays in the realm of just cringe funny and doesn't get to the point where people are having to duck for cover because they've offended the wrong people. All right, let me go ahead and catch up on chats. We're also live on the audio feed, so if you want to join us, go to ips.monster and find the links. Okay, Lean Dion says, Fed jokes aren't funny. No, absolutely. Comedy is very gate kept. Like they say, truth sounds like hate to those who hate the truth. Um, it's so subjective, but yeah, they use comedy for the most part to dictate what is and isn't funny, and it's really based on what is consistent with the values espoused by the power elite and what they want us to think. It's the standards change all the time. At one moment they have an acceptable scapegoat, and fast forward 20 years, and now that's the sacred cow that they all worship. They just flip things like this. Must be gaslighting. But now, look, I'm all for listening to all perspectives, but I do take my media analysis somewhat seriously. And I think that when someone like a Tucker Carlson says this movie's not a Q movie, I have to think he must be talking to very low information viewers. And we're very informed. And the point I'm making here is that you have the misinformed, who are the masses, who are pandered to by the manipulators in charge. And I'm not among that group, and I just find it very disingenuous, and it makes me think that he's probably just an elitist pretending to be a populist. I don't know who needs to hear this. But I guess as we roll into next year, you're going to see how many of these so-called truthers just line up to go vote. But now, let's see here. Let's move on to the next topic. Let's see. I have this short clip. I'm not going to play it, but the actor Danny Trujillo was out there in California, in Hollywood. It looks like it's in front of a green screen, but they're doing this. Oh, Danny Trejo. Danny Trejo is part of this Hollywood strike, and he says he feels like we're all on the Titanic. They're all on the Titanic, and they're rearranging deck chairs. Interesting metaphor, and very significant considering the significance of the Titanic in recent days. I just got a picture of it. President Trump sitting in front of the movie theater, front row at the center, watching Sound of Freedom next to Jim Caviezel and Tim Ballard. So he's between the two of them. Fascinating. Again, Tim Ballard. Now look, you might not believe that he's Paul Walker, but look at the face, look at the deviated septum, look at the nose specifically, look at the lips, and then look at the spouses. I'm pretty sure it's the same. And there's a deeper connection here that I wanted to point out before we moved on. In the Fast and Furious movie, he was on the same set with an actor who, shortly after that movie, became Q. Yeah, the QAnon movement, the PSYOP, has a number of people behind it who are connected to Trump. And one of them is actually a New Zealand-based actor who got into politics. And he was in Fast and Furious with this Tim Ballard. And so you can kind of see the connection here. There's a connection between this persona that was running PSYOPs, like he's saving children, and this was meant to lend credence to the Q storyline that they're going underground and saving children. Joined by Beetle Freakers. Thank you for joining. If you want to call in, numbers on the screen. Let me see if I have any more voicemails. Oh yeah, Echo Charlie was asking about Owen Schroyer, the QAnon shaman. Are they the same person? I messaged the QAnon shaman on Twitter, and I'm trying to get him on for an interview, but if he's a Fed, they won't let him. And in my honest assessment, my opinion here is that every single January 6th so-called political prisoner was a Fed. All of them. There were no innocents. There were no grandmas and grandpas who were just taking a tour who got thrown into jail. There were no political prisoners, and there were no deaths. No cops died. No protesters with "Don't Tread on Me" flags got trampled to death. That didn't happen. The guy that tasered himself in his genitals, that didn't happen. Nope, there are no political prisoners from January 6th. The QAnon shaman is a total Fed. I think we all knew this stuff. Okay, now let me go ahead and move on to this part. I have a few tweets I want to read. few things here. There's some great stuff going down with Nick Fuentes, but I'm going to wait till it all pans out. I like to watch these world stage characters eat their own. Okay, so I've been reading The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. And I've been reading it because I think the arguments against faith-based belief systems created by man, making extraordinary claims that cannot be proven, I agree with a lot of what he says. And I think you can apply a lot of this logic and a lot of these arguments to mass media, which is the de facto state religion. So it has a lot of usefulness. The God Delusion does. The argumentation. But I'm like 350 pages in, and I'm sitting in my truck just reading this thing, and I was very surprised to find some defense of child abuse, minimizing child abuse, defending child abusers. And he makes this insane claim that being raised Catholic is worse than being physically abused. He actually said this. Let me go ahead and I'm probably going to paraphrase it because I don't even like reading it because he's using words to diffuse something. In fact, it's disgusting. But this is so bad. He said, I'm just going to read these pull quotes. You can go ahead and look up the book, The God Delusion. He says, the example shows that it's possible for the psychological abuse of children to outclass physical. He's talking about this child who's abused who said, I never lost sleep because of the priest and what the priest did, but I spent many nights terrified that people I loved would go to hell, and this gave me nightmares. So he's suggesting that the reoccurring nightmares about hell were actually more damaging because the person didn't think much of their abuse. Now, it gets even crazier. He says, and he's talking about the panics against predators, and he thinks it's overblown. And here's what he says, because he's trying to, again, this is insane. He says, the passions of this mob had been aroused by a horrifying murder, sexually motivated, of an 8-year-old girl kidnapped in Sussex. Nevertheless, it is, and I'm quoting Richard Dawkins, it is, quote, unjust to visit upon all pedophiles a vengeance appropriate only to the tiny minority who are also murderers. So what he says there is that they're not all worthy of the wood chipper, only the ones that kill kids. I'm sorry, but when did that change? Then he says, all 3 of the boarding schools I attended employed teachers whose affection for small boys overstepped the bounds of propriety. This was indeed reprehensible. Nevertheless, if they had been hounded on by vigilantes or lawyers as being no better than child murderers, I would have felt obliged to come to their defense. In other words, if the boarding schools he attended that were run by pedos were suddenly attacked by mobs, he would defend them. And then he says this, quote, even as the victim of one of them. And then in parentheses he says, an embarrassing but otherwise harmless experience. Okay, now here's the next part. This is where it gets even crazier. Yeah, Ollie Goering says he's suspicious. Well, these atheists are interesting to me for a few reasons, because they're selective atheists. They've accepted a new God, just it's dressed up differently. He says, once in a question time after a lecture in Dublin, I was asked what I thought about the widely publicized cases of the abuse by Catholic priests in Ireland. I replied that, quote, as sexual abuse, no doubt the damage was arguably less than the long-term psychological damage inflicted on a child being brought up Catholic in the first place. As horrible as the abuse is, the damage is less than the long-term psychological damage inflicted by bringing up the child as a Catholic in the first place. This was an off-the-cuff remark made in the heat of the moment, and I was surprised. This is Richard Dawkins talking about it. Anyway, it's sickening, in my opinion. And surprising. I wasn't expecting this. I'm looking for logic, reasoned arguments, and then I find like apologist. He's an apologist for his own abusers, the abusers of others. I mean, minimizing the damage of it. And I couldn't read the first page because I don't want that attributed to my voice, but it's pretty disturbing. Don't know quite what to make of it. Kenny Edwards, son of Dennis Edwards of Temptation, says, does God have a name? Good question. Good question. Okay, this is if you want to call in, it's 505-510-4226. Does God have a name? I was talking to some people in Discord the other day, and a lot of people I come across come off as very much like deists. Like they're almost sounding like they're religious, but they don't quite adhere to any religion or any specific set of holy books or scriptures, but they're convinced that there's some kind of higher power at work. And I think synchronicity, the experience of a synchronicity, the meaningfulness, the intrinsic meaningfulness of all things, the interconnectedness, the fact that it's not meaninglessness, that it's quite the opposite, that the information is just made of these inherently meaningful connections between everything. I think that, yeah, you could easily make the case for some kind of deistic notion. Atheism doesn't make any sense, in my view. Non-theism makes sense. Non-theism is kind of agnostic about it, but it's rejecting the premise set by theists. But I'm not overly concerned with it, because I think religion and the monopoly on the truth is just another weapon against the masses. I mean, religious people are put into groupthink echo chambers that are all weaponized, like bumper cars, and they all just bump against each other endlessly, and they don't realize that they're all being played. Skill says, they do not rescue children without the resources for trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah, I did hear that the Underground Railroad group, that they did supposedly rescue some people, but they just sort of dropped them off somewhere. Okay, the Drudge Report changed, but earlier today it was sex in space, and it had this couple making out in front of the cupola, and I'm just pointing out that it's fake. Space is fake. Space is actually just heaven in this new paradigm, and it's all allegorical. Okay, continuing. Yeah, go ahead and phone in if you want to, 505-510-4226. MAGA porn is the big story right now. Marjorie Taylor Greene brought large printed out photographs of Hunter Biden and his recorded sex tapes with prostitutes. And she's showing it off. If this is all going out into the public record, insane. I mean, we're looking at, this is just a hearing. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene shows off perverse Hunter Biden pics. And I want to point out that these pics are all with adults. We're not looking at sex crimes necessarily. But these are X-rated pictures. Here's the story from the New York Post. First son, Hunter Biden, on full frontal display Wednesday at the House Oversight Committee hearing. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene caused a stir when she pulled out photos of the 53-year-old in a compromising position with a series of women as she asked questions of the unmasked IRS whistleblower, Joseph Ziegler, with questions. Now, this is a new low, as far as I'm concerned. The fact that they had to print these out, it's just character assassination. And I know he's disgusting and gross and all that, but they're overselling it. Yeah, sure, he's degenerate. But look, we're looking at, this is a laptop that's been out for 4 years. 4 years. And the fact that it's not as bad as they say is not an obstacle. They never let facts get in the way of a good narrative. And they're like, oh no, let's go ahead and manufacture it. So now I'm looking on Twitter, and some of the stuff is just disturbing. Somebody has a picture of Joe Biden with his granddaughter. And this is a patriot. And their patriotic duty was to Photoshop in bruises on the knees and make some disgusting comments about what just happened. And I'm like, did you not just manufacture some content here to score political points? Like, I've seen some new lows in the last few days. Terrible. Lean Dion says, degenerate adult behind closed doors isn't illegal. I guess they could possibly suggest he was involved in trafficking. I'm not exactly sure the extent of it, but the point of it is, uh, their manufacturing claims that it was full of abuse of stuff that, the kind of stuff that Ollie Alexander would do. Okay, let's see. Going through my Twitter feeds at Real Tim Osman, my blue check verified account that is not allowed to go on Spaces. In the coming days, I will be able to incorporate audio from the internet and different sites and sound bites, but I don't want to overtax it just yet. I want to just kind of one thing at a time. I might need to upgrade, and I'm prepared to do that in a couple of weeks, so it's not a big deal. But I am ready to take calls. We are capable of taking calls. I uploaded a video today of a man shouting that he was stuck in a time loop. I don't know if you saw that. It was on an airplane on a Chinese airline. A man jumped up and started saying he was stuck in a time loop, and this was his 6th time in the cycle. And he said that the plane was going to crash. And of course, this is being compared to the woman who saw the reptilian, and they still haven't found her. The plane ended up not flying, and he was sent to, I guess, an asylum. So what's the connection here? Not quite sure, but you got the subways, you've got the planes. It just seems somewhat concerted. And there were a couple of incidents with people trying to open the doors on planes that were very suspect. When you look at these things in the aggregate, you begin to see patterns. You can kind of discern them. The subway thing was very surprising to me, just how that all just came about. And we realized, okay, this Jordan Neely psyop in the subway was predicated by subways being used in the Batman movie, the Joker movie, in the Frank James shooting, and a number of other high-profile psyops for the sole purpose of communicating the Marxist class warfare narrative, metaphorically. In the subways, the lower class and the uprising, chasing the upper class out of the cities, get out of the cities. I mean, these stories are unfolding. And another big story that's been unfolding for the last year has been this new satanic panic, which I think is going to also continue to move forward. I mean, you saw how this was about, a month and a half ago? No, was it last month? Yeah, when Target was actually employing a Satanist who had made these Baphomet designs to do their pride display. Like, that was an obvious provocation. It was super easy to find this out. New York Post, woman drags activist by the hair to stop her from blocking traffic. Congratulations. Someone should give her not GoFundMe. GoFundMe is only for leftists. Like, you'll get a GoFundMe for the climate activist who got his hair pulled. But a Give, Send, Go for the blonde woman who dragged the activist by the hair. These activists who block the road are martyrs, they're stooges, they're useful idiots, but they're also dangerous to themselves, to others, and their activism takes a toll on the environment. Like, the best place for them is quite literally the jail cell. And if you don't think that we should be preemptively locking up environmentalists, then you're really not thinking ahead, because their objective is to put you in jail. The objective of the Greenies is to create this demand for ubiquitous home incarceration. They want everybody to be locked down to save the planet. And if they're ready to lock you down for good, then I would suggest let's go ahead and just start putting them away first, minimizing their carbon footprints, and maybe even dampening their enthusiasm for that particular lifestyle. These utopians are always so quick to burn down and destroy what we have. That's kind of the path we're on. Build back better. Joined by A. Woodward, 7899, says, I've missed all of you, couldn't find. Well, I'm glad that you're here. Go to ips.monster, get on the newsletter. I do send out the live stream notifications and archives. And if you're a Patreon supporter, even at $1 per month, you do get the archives sent to you pretty much nightly as a MP3, soon video. Again, a few things that are in the news right now, or in our news. Marjorie Taylor Greene, MAGA porn at the hearing. Alex Stein versus George Floyd's twin, his cousin. Again, Alex Stein says, quote, "Do you think I should be worried about these vague threats from ex-NBA player and George Floyd cousin? Let's talk about this." Steven Jackson. Very bad development there. Richard Dawkins defending child predators, very disturbing. It's a bad look for atheists also. Because, look, you may not be a believer or whatever, but at the very minimum, at least there's some statements in the Bible about leaving the children alone, right? The millstone thing. But I guess if you're completely throwing it all out, you're like, oh yeah, we can just do away with that. I mean, some animals eat their young. I mean, what is the basis for this? Oh, yeah, ips.monster is a domain that I made it. Here's why I chose that domain name. It was the only one I could find with IPS that didn't cost more than $30,000. And we are trying to marshal our forces, get all the people who are AutoHoax savvy together in one place and metastasize it. An exponential explosion of legitimate media deconstructs. So in other words, we're kind of like waking the Kraken, which is this metaphor that the media has been using for some time. And I'm like, well, we'll go ahead and appropriate that. And I do have the Kraken noise. So if you were to donate at ko-fi.com/Tim Osman, you actually hear Godzilla. And I think it does I'm not sure if I have to reset this up, but it does a text to speech of whatever you post. And speaking of, Godzilla's birthday is November the 3rd. And on his next birthday, there's a new Godzilla movie coming out. The last one, Godzilla vs. King Kong, if you recall, Godzilla was stored at the sub-level 33. Now listen to this. Genghis Khan, unpopular opinion. The Sound of Freedom is not a movie to stop child trafficking. It's a movie designed to outrage and scare parents into demanding something be done about it. The preventive measures already presented in the movie. It's implanting microchips in children and biometric tracking. Mark my words. Now that's very interesting. Very interesting. And don't think they won't do it. They'll just have Trump sell it. If Trump sells, and look, Trump is at the movie right now. He's watching it. He's front row seats next to Tim Ballard and Jim Caviezel. I don't know if Mel Gibson is there. Marcus Goldfinch is probably there. Q is there. But he's watching The Sound of Freedom right now. And if you think about it, they used him as the Vax father, right? And it would make perfect sense that if they needed somebody, hey, we need somebody, the ones in the capstone, the ones we don't see, the reptoids, whoever's at the top of this thing, they're sitting around their round table and they're saying, hey, we need somebody who can convince the masses to put microchips in their children. Okay, let's get this actor, have him play Jesus. And then get this guy, have him do a psyop where he rescues children, and then have Trump, their savior, sell it to him. Boom. A. Woodward asks if JFK Jr. was there, dressed as Santa Claus. I'm the only person who posited that Tim Ballard might actually be JFK Jr. in a mask. I know it contradicts the Paul Walker thing, but you never let contradictions get in the way of a good Q story. Nobody brought that up. I'm like, why am I the first one? But, there are a lot of critics who I think have been vindicated. Like, my rejection of the movie was, when somebody tells me to do something because they don't want me to, I feel like I'm being coerced. I feel like this is basic marketing, bandwagoneering, reverse psychology. Who falls for this stuff? And then I look at the theater that I went to. It's very nice. It was perfect as far as a movie production, as far as a theater experience would be. But according to the Twitter sphere, according to all these MAGA influencers with tens of thousands of subscribers on TikTok, the AMC movie theaters were all shutting down the air conditioning, making it really hot, like you're in hell, rescuing children along with Jim Caviezel, which is part of the experience. You're going down into the dark where it's the fires of hell and you're rescuing. I think it's part of the theater. But anyway, it also makes it sound like they're more virtuous for having gone and seen it. But the method of trying to get someone to do something you want by asking them to do something, knowing that they're going to want to do it to antagonize the guys who are stopping him, it plays into this idea of Trump's a rogue. Oh yeah, Trump's going against the system. He's going to buck the system, follow him. And they line up. I got this tweet from 100 It's Level, who sounds pretty informed. And it's a compilation of photos of Jim Caviezel covering his eye, one hand in his coat, covering his mouth, his fingers forming the same hand sign that Andrew Tate makes, making all of the usual hand signs. But I guess when the good guys flash the devil sign, it's not a big deal. That means I love you. Amazing. Now, we've been talking a lot about the symbol of the Kraken and how it correlates to the Titanic, this recent event with the submersible going down to the Titanic, and of course the Abyss being brought into the story. James Cameron's Ghosts of the Abyss, and how he was at the Titanic filming Ghosts of the Abyss on 9/11 when the towers sank or fell. But the correlation is he filmed the Titanic in 1997, and he depicts the Titanic splitting in two, like twin towers sinking, one of them kind of vertical with jumpers and everything. My point is, the abyss is a specific word that you see in Revelation 9/11. And this stuff is all getting really integrated. Because 9/11, he's down there in the abyss, filming the abyss, and he's in a vessel called the Challenger. Revelation 9/11 says they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, the abyss, whose name is Abaddon, or in Greek, Apollyon. This is all interesting. The correlation of the abyss with space, and some people had compared the mission or the submersible lost in the abyss, kind of like the Apollo, was it the Apollo where it was temporarily out of communication? Anyway, there's this building narrative and story about this beast in the pit, or the Kraken, and of course the destroyer. And this ties into Oppenheimer, where he talks about how he has become death, destroyer of worlds. Again, this is all kind of linking up here. And then someone sent this to me. This was posted on Twitter by Michael Letts, Michael in Truth. It's talking about this thing called the pit in the Dark Knight trilogy. So here we get another, I brought up Oppenheimer. Well, here's another reference, same director here. We're talking about Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan. Quote, "There's a reason why this prison is the worst hell on earth. Every man who has rotted here over the centuries looked up to the light and imagined climbing so easy, so simple, and like a shipwrecked man turning to sea water from uncontrollable thirst, many have died trying." That's Bane, talking about this pit. Well, the pit is a prison located in the ancient part of the world which had established a fearsome reputation, and it became known as the worst hell on earth. It featured a well-like structure where prisoners were free to climb in an attempt to escape, and everyone who tried failed. Anyway, the story goes on to talk about how Bruce Wayne managed to escape, how Batman got out. And the way he got out was he found that you could only escape by using adrenaline to boost the human body's capability beyond the norm. And Bruce made the jump, and he did it without the rope because the fear of dying gave him the adrenaline he needed to make the leap. Now, my point to bringing this up is you have Batman in a pit, Batman escaping the pit. And the connection here is with the correlation between Donald Trump and the Batman. And the name Abaddon, another name for Apollyon, the beast in the pit, ties into Trump as Abaddon, who does have in Trump Tower a whole room dedicated to Apollo. And of course, his penthouse in his towers were actually used in the Devil's Advocate for the Devil's actual office space. So what I'm pointing out here, though, is that there's just more building up here along this story of Donald Trump being correlated with this Antichrist, the beast from the pit. JL talks about this theme quite often. But the further connection here is Christopher Nolan, Batman. Christopher Nolan and Destroyer of Worlds. Of course, that's what Abaddon means, the Destroyer. And of course, that movie has all the requisite connections to the number 11/6 or 6/11, which is also in the Batman movie when Gotham gets flooded. The Kraken is released on 11/6. Gotham goes underwater. It's the repeated theme here, and it all has to do with this thing rising up. And again, just this is another point that when Trump was brought in to be arrested, it was on Heath Ledger's The Joker's 44th birthday. This is fascinating. I mean, March 4th, Batman movie comes out. The Joker, the so-called Joker from the Boston bombing, has his death penalty reinstated. Here we have on 4/4, which we talked about the significance of it. I mean, you know, Trump was referred to as Christ that entire week. As absurd as that sounds, he's the least Christ-like person I've ever seen, which makes it likely he is the Antichrist. But on Saturday Night Live, before his 4/4/2023 arraignment, they had this skit where Donald Trump was in front of the Last Supper. It was very blasphemous, I should say. Talked about how he was greater than Jesus. But the fascinating connection here again is simply that, oh, hey, yesterday was the release date of The Dark Knight, by the way. So I guess we're also looking at the anniversary of the Aurora shooting. But fascinatingly, it was Heath Ledger, the Joker's birthday, where Trump is being arraigned at the courthouse where the new Joker movie just happened to be filmed that day. Skill says the new Barbie movie is toxic malevolence I'm trying to avoid. Yeah, I don't want to have to watch it for predicted programming. It looks unwatchable, but A. Woodward asks, is there any newer Mad Mike insights in the last 6 months? Well, on 2/22/2020, he attempted a Mile High launch for the Science Channel's TV program Homemade Astronauts. And there was a malfunction, which I think knocked him out. And he didn't deploy his parachutes because he wasn't able to. And he insisted beforehand that there's no way that they can remotely detonate the parachutes from the ground. He didn't want that to be an option. He said if he did that, it would not be a daredevil stunt. So no, he actually died a daredevil death. Although he did, in fact, cement his reputation as the world's greatest daredevil for all time, I don't imagine anybody eclipsing that. The space jump didn't happen, although they did have the craft, the plan. They just needed the money for the helium, assuming there's any left. I was thinking that we're reaching peak helium, and this would explain why all the satellites were falling. You know, NASA's like the main consumer of the stuff. Eric Bear says, what do you think of the Tupac news and Jason Aldean being in the news? Well, so Jason Aldean being in the news is interesting in itself because of his connection to Vegas. And the song is some kind of a call out to BLM. And then you have George Floyd being mocked by Alex Stein on Blaze TV, which is Glenn Beck's thing. So it might not be accidental that Steven Jackson is calling for someone to go after Alex Stein. So there's a lot of this kind of bubbling beneath the surface. I haven't seen the Tupac news. I saw a tweet of him today where he's in a bathtub covered in gold. I saw some tweets debunking a lot of the stories and the mythology around him. Here it is. Tupac's death was staged, according to Vision for the Blind on Twitter. It's Vision number 4, The Blind. I highly recommend this channel. This photo is reportedly the last taken of Tupac on the night he was shot. One problem, the date is wrong. The shooting happened on September the 7th, not the 8th. Moreover, there are no keys in the ignition, and the photo was supposedly taken while they were driving. Okay. Now, I got a tweet here. It might be fake, though. It looks like an appropriately aged Michael Jackson. Looks kind of grandmotherly. Some QAnoner put it out. It says, MJ 2021, he is still alive. And then someone else added to it, yeah, he's working with Tim Ballard and has an upcoming soundtrack to the movie Sounds of Freedom. That might be misinformation. But you'll find on Twitter they don't care. If you want to make up something hopey about what might happen, about the Galactic Federation or about 8D chess that Trump is doing, and you tweet about it, you will get endless numbers of retweets. They don't vet it. They're just addicted to the hopium. Like, it's pretty bad. It's like low quality, like mined fentanyl, and they line up like zombies for it. But yeah, big news. Trump is going to be arrested in a couple of days. On Sunday night, he was handed the news. He just exited Turning Point. And at the Turning Point event, he said he was going to purge the deep state. He was going to get rid of communism. He's going to get rid of CRT. He said he's going to get rid of the Marxists in the universities. I'm like, where do you separate the two? These daycare centers, indoctrination camps. And how relevant are they today? I mean, aren't they kind of being rendered obsolete by remote learning? Okay, let's see. A. Woodward says, it's been a while, couldn't find you. If you ever can't find us, I understand because of the level of targeting. But just stay on the newsletter or join Patreon for $1 a month or join any of our research think tanks. Stay in the know. Stay informed. Because if you're not informed, your default position is to be either misinformed, or if you're too smart to believe that nonsense, you'll just be uninformed, which means that you have to catch up really fast and cram, which we're going to help you with. I mean, because I understand how busy people are, how little time we have for the circus. And my solution is, one of the things we're doing here at the headquarters is I'm setting up a station for newsreaders. Part of the vision here is we want IPR to deliver to the truthers what NPR delivers to the mainstream mediated. So the normies get their NPR, the people who see through it should get their IPR. And the way it's going to work is I'm leveraging the power of ChatGPT and Claude AI in order to write press releases, which I'll have read professionally by local talent. And it'll just be a short news brief based podcast to augment everything else that we do. Very similar to NPR. That's the objective here, and we'll be doing that here very soon. Eric of Bear says NPR, NPC. That's right. The NPR logo is an NPC. Okay, I want to catch up on my notes here. We talked about MTG, MAGA porn, Jason Aldean, Alex Stein, Stephen Jackson, the Joker coincidences and the significance of it, given that Donald Trump's about to go back in. Richard Dawkins is a pedo apologist, which I'm disappointed to see. Keanu Reeves is touring with Dogstar, his band, which has reunited after 20 years. They say more than 20 years. I'd like to know exactly how long. Was it 23 years? And also note that the Dog Days of Summer are from 7/3 to 8/11, so it's right in the middle of the Dog Days of Summer. He's out there performing live. And that's on the Hollywood Reporter. We talked about the man on the Chinese airline caught in a time loop. Continuing breaking news. In a moving tribute to George Floyd, Hunter Biden leaves bag of fentanyl in the White House library. Right. Look, that's the guardrail line. They love to do this, though. They love to leave you with a narrative you can choose. Choose your own reality. I choose to see Derek Chauvin as a hero and a defender of Western chauvinism. I choose to see George Floyd as a Christ, a martyr, suffering for the sins of a capitalistic society that no longer sees value in the poor or even in Gaia itself. We talked about Alex Stein being threatened. Hopefully nothing happens. He's just joking. Look, let me just point this out. I may not defend Alex Stein and a lot of the stuff that he says because it's cringe, but in principle, I actually do. Like, in principle, I may not like what somebody has to say, but I'll defend their right to say it. Alex Stein has every right to have his boyfriend put on a George Floyd mask and have objects thrown at him, if that's what he wants to do. And we have the right not to watch it or to criticize it or to boycott it. But to resort to violence because you don't like it shows that you don't really understand the importance of freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is there to protect speech that is deemed offensive, because if it's inoffensive, it doesn't need any defense. And like Will Smith slapping Chris Rock, like, okay, that's violence used against words. And if Stein's art is offensive, then, he deserves to be criticized or whatever, but you can cry about it. You can always cry. That you can. What else? What else does he expect? He's a comedian, and you might not even think he's funny. I think it's a conspiracy theory that he's a comedian. I remember he was a conspiracy theorist, and then suddenly he's a. But the point of it is, he has every right to be obnoxious and cringy, and Steven Jackson does not actually have the right to use his platform to incite violence. And if that happens, well, we'll see. So look, sorry, but I have to defend Alex Stein, who's my favorite drag queen. And I say that in all seriousness because he's a Poe. He's a parody of extremism, but he's taken it so far that he's actually become everything that he's parodied. And he's not look, the point of it is, I haven't watched his little clip. I might actually take the time here to watch it. Mocking George Floyd is in bad taste. George Floyd, if you actually believe he died and you mock him, you're even worse. I mock it because I don't believe he's dead, and I know he's not, and I have information to back this. But if you're going to play with the mainstream narrative in such a reckless way, how are you not an agent provocateur? Which is what I'm starting to suspect here, especially with this Jason Aldean song going to number 1 on iTunes. The timing of that is very conspicuous. Okay, I had some other notes. In fact, I have pages and pages of notes. And phones are still open if anybody wants to call in, 505-510-4226. I have a number of articles that I'm writing about, this is interesting, the whole thing about RFK Jr. and how he suggested the virus was targeting whites and blacks and sparing Jews, and how this would imply that the Jews were the center of the pestilence. Now, if you follow the logic here and how they structure these PSYOP narratives, the left is terrorized with viruses and anti-vaxxers. And the right is terrorized with sin, because sin is an archaic concept that has been updated with the virus. State gives you salvation now, but they still use the old programming on the right. So the right is worried about sin and what they call social contagion, that it's going to spread. This is why they're so mad at Pride, because they think that's spreading these other lifestyles and this sinful lifestyle. So for RFK Jr. to associate Jews with the COVID is interesting, because it's kind of a reboot of the old system of blood libel and blaming Jews as the synagogue of Satan for all the evil in the world to be combated by the body of Christ. So this is all just programming on the left and the right, and they use the old school with the new school programming. It's kind of overlapping. It's fascinating. We talked about 6/11. A few significant points about it. Again, the Oppenheimer movie, they're wearing badges. K6, which is 11/6. 11/6, Gotham Underwater. The movie about the nuke, Oppenheimer, is 11 miles long, weighs 600 pounds. 6/11, Tim McVeigh executed. 6/11, Timothy 6/11 is actually on the pendant worn by Tim Ballard. And 6/11 was the day the Patriot Front jumped out of the U-Haul. This was last year, or the year before last. And the significance there, of course, is Patriot Front were out to protest the groomers. And this is when the whole groomer panic really was kicking up. So that's all very much, I think, indicators that we're looking at a structured PSYOP, left versus right, just the perpetual war as usual. Okay, continuing, going through your comments. Yes, ips.monster or infiniteplane.live, and feel free to call in and leave voicemails, and I will play them live tomorrow if we don't get to them tonight. And I'm still working around the schedule of everyone else around the office place here. I'm actually getting some noise cancellation boards, and I'm going to be working on making this office space a place to produce a lot of audio content, and I don't want to disturb my neighbors. There's nobody here now. I'm like the only person in the building, but I want to be able to work here all day and be as loud as we need to be. So again, thank you all for the continued support and also attending, because this is what it's really about. It's about the think tank itself, the live, interactive networking of the most informed people really out there. There are no objectivists outside of auto hoaxers. The world is awash in subjectivism. We're living in the age of Aquarius. This is a massive data dump. It's an info deluge meant to negate the impact of truth because it's been washed away in a sea of irrelevance. As Aldous Huxley had suggested would happen in Brave New World, we're living in it, as you all see it. And the reason why we're not lost at sea here, why we're not adrift in this sea of misinfo, is that we've rafted together, which is what you call it when a group of penguins amass. And it's this rafting process that we're continuing to develop because eventually we will have formed a distinct parallel media that is not antagonistic or anti the mainstream, but exists independent of it. We don't need to breathe their air, but we have our own observations to augment their lies and give us a fuller picture. And this is going to be done through the work of our think tank, our researchers, and our more than 156 press pass carriers, who will all be on the same sheet literally in the coming months here once we go into print with our tabloid. Joined here by Flat Earth Stuff. Yeah, the Flat Earth topic doesn't get enough airtime anywhere. And like I don't know why it's not talked about. Like, did the controversy just end? You know, it's like they buried it, they stymied the communication, and they chastised and they straw-manned it, but they never actually dismantled it in a meaningful way. And in the years since they've managed to stifle it, at least 2018, they haven't brought forth anything in fake space to make it look any realer. SpaceX hasn't produced anything convincing. NASA's trolling us and clowning us 24/7. We got this space salami. Like, if you still believe in outer space, you got to answer for the space chorizo. You have a $10 billion telescope out there, and the scientists associated with it, the astronomers associated with it, they bring out this picture that shows a slice of salami against a backdrop of stars, and everybody's jaw drops, and they're like, wow, that's 4.2 trillion light years away. It's the most beautiful star I've ever seen. And then he's like, hey, I'm just kidding. It's a piece of salami and some Photoshop. But millions of people fell for it. And you can tell because the number of retweets, the number of shares, all these Neil deGrasse Tyson types were like just really taken aback by how beautiful it was. It's like religious art to these people. Then the guy says it's a joke. Now this tells us two things. It tells us that space is fakeable, one. And two, it tells us that the believers in space are low information believers, that it doesn't take a lot to convince them. So our arguments against the existence of space far outweigh their existences in favor of it. I'm like, show me a picture of a satellite. Like, yeah, there's millions of pictures online. Yeah, search, Google it. Cartoons. It's all cartoons. Unless you're going to say that we're in a simulation Minecraft universe, and once you hit the Kármán line 62 miles, it's all pixels. That would explain the CGI reality we get from the ISS on their so-called live feeds. Anyway, thank you all for joining. I'm going to send out the archives here shortly after. We have a lot to talk about. I'm going to continue on tomorrow morning, and it will be the IPS morning deprogram. I'll be sending out archives probably in the next couple of hours, so go ahead and check your inboxes. And, feel free to email me any questions or requests. I'm going to be in the office during the afternoon taking calls and, off the record. And I'm trying to network and set up some other things as well, panel conversations, interviews, etc. So this has been fun. We will see you all tomorrow. I'm going to turn this back on over to the 24/7. And this is Bread and Circus, Chief Crow.